Ukrainian Victory Plan. New peace plan to be released next week. Speculation around the document generate more questions of peace talk moods. This week, Western intelligence released new estimates on the casualties from the Ukrainian war. According to the estimates, 1 million casualties have occurred since the Russian invasion in February 2022. According to estimates, Russia has suffered 200,000 deaths and 400,000 injuries, while Ukraine has suffered 80,000 deaths and 400,000 injuries. Both Russia and Ukraine have refrained from commenting, but it's probable that they won't reach a consensus, given that they both employ exaggerated enemy casualties to underestimate their own to gain advantage in the information battle. As discussion over peace talks continue, the grim figures are making headlines, with both hawks and doves attempting to press their positions ahead of the United Nations General Assembly meeting next week, where Ukraine President Zelensky is expected to unveil his Ukrainian peace plan. President Zelensky created the Ukrainian peace plan to replace the 10-point peace plan, but he has not released its details. The goal is to get enough international support at the UN to convince the international community to support Ukraine's goal to get Russia to agree to attend face-to-face talks, with a stated goal of November start date. President Zelensky has publicly declared that the new plan is 90% complete and requires review from the White House before the General Assembly meeting. President Zelensky gave the first glimpse of the new peace proposal at the 20th Annual Yalta European Strategy meeting, where he spoke from Kiev. He asserted that we can either militarily or diplomatically drive out an occupying army to liberate ourselves from occupation. These statements, along with the plan's title, indicate the overall tone of the strategy. The title, Ukrainian Victory Plan, implies that one person's victory is synonymous with another's loss. This is fine when a simple diplomatic or political gesture is to declare victory by redefining what victory actually means. However, the declaration of freed from occupation implies that the plan aims to restore Ukraine's borders to those of 1991. Ukraine maintains the stance that any peace plan must ensure the restoration and protection of its territorial integrity. Several polls have revealed a shift in the Ukrainian population stance, indicating a willingness to engage in negotiations with Russia to end the war, but a decreased likelihood of endorsing any territorial concessions to Russia. While it makes sense for the invaded country to demand territorial restoration, how can diplomacy be achieved with these goals without making some concession to Russia? The diplomatic options available to Ukraine would include not joining NATO or the European Union or making any association with these organizations. These two concessions would mean that Ukraine's security and long-term stability will remain vulnerable to Russian intervention in the future, and this has been an issue since the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. The only other realistic concession would be economic concessions to the Russians, such as natural resources of occupied eastern Ukraine. The issue with this is that it would deny Ukraine a source of revenue and jobs, which these jobs and resources could create financial stability for the country. It is true that Ukraine currently does not have access to these resources due to the Russian occupation, so giving the rights up as a concession would be the continuation of the status quo. However, this is deceiving because a significant portion of Western aid to Ukraine is not military aid, but economic aid to keep the economy going and maintain a stable society. Giving up these rights as a concession to regain lost territory would mean that the West would have to continue providing economic assistance to Ukraine for the foreseeable future, even with peace restored. The alternative involves the West directly compensating Russia to exit Ukraine, a strategy that appears improbable and politically unfeasible due to the anticipated strong opposition from voters. The alternative is that Ukraine has nothing to offer and the West and Russia will negotiate its concessions. Many analysts view this as the ultimate Russian goal, interpreting the war as a response to Russian grievances against the West since the Soviet Union's fall in December 1991. After the Soviet Union fell, President Boris Yeltsin assumed power as the Russian Federation president and negotiated many of the post-Cold War agreements between Russia and the West. However, Russia found itself in a precarious position due to the collapse of the communist system, its lack of strength to challenge the West, and the declining health of Yeltsin. Vladimir Putin, who later served as President Yeltsin's close deputy and eventually succeeded him, views the war and its negotiation as a chance to address the post-Cold War grievances, including NATO expansion and issues with Western-dominated institutions like the IMF or anything to do with international global trade. This implies that the West and Russia could debate Ukraine's fate, similar to how France and the United Kingdom negotiated with Germany over Czechoslovakia's fate in the Munich Agreement of 1938. This does not mean to imply that Hitler or Chamberlain represent any country. Rather, it's a case of other countries negotiating another's fate and then impose a settlement on that country. The other question is, are President Zelensky or President Putin ready for peace? President Putin announced a call of an additional 180,000 recruits to increase the size of the army to 1.5 million and a total armed forces to 2.4 million by December 2024. The call up of 180,000 additional recruits falls significantly short of the general mobilization plans from early in the war, which were so unpopular that many Russian men fled the country to avoid conflict, ultimately leading to the scrapping of the mobilization plan. The Russian government asserted that the need for the additional forces stems from a broader military reform initiative that transcends the conflict in Ukraine. However, it is contradictory for the Russian government to claim that they require an additional 180,000 soldiers for Ukraine, given their assertions that the war is progressing in their favor. Ukraine has been pushing the United States and United Kingdom to end all restrictions on the use and type of weapons donated to Ukraine and allow them to strike targets deeper into Russia. Last week, British Prime Minister Starmer and U.S. President Biden met to discuss the issue, but they deferred the decision, much to the frustration of President Zelensky, who again called for the lifting of all restrictions. He also asserted that given the extensive damage to Ukraine's infrastructure and the introduction of North Korean and anticipated Iranian missiles, which allow Russia to attack Ukraine without any restrictions, the U.S. and UK should consider implementing similar restrictions on their own weapons donated to Ukraine. Additionally, he urged Ukraine allies to assume a more proactive role in intercepting missiles and drones over Ukraine, a tactic they have employed against Israel in response to Iranian proxy attacks. Ukrainian and Polish officials met to discuss the removal of European aid for draft-age men from Ukraine who choose to avoid military service by living outside of Ukraine and in the European Union, with the aim of compelling more men to serve in the armed forces. The Ukraine peace plan appears to hinge upon the threat to expand the war into Russia, while Russia relies on a war of attrition to ground down Ukraine and outlast Western support for the war. Both Ukraine and Russia rely on external sources to sustain their wars, with Ukraine relying on the West for financial support and weapons, while Russia, although less dependent, relies on Iran and North Korea for weapons and China for market access and dual-use products. The US and UK are open to releasing weapons use, but they have stated that they do not want to risk expanding the war by crossing another Russian red line. However, they could potentially use this as leverage to convince Russia to attend peace talks. Germany, having confirmed its plan to reduce support to Ukraine in 2025, has also called for a negotiated end to the war. Euro bondholders have agreed to write off part of Ukraine's owed debt, anticipating a drawdown in the war and refraining from extending further credit until the war's conclusion. China, while advocating for the end of the war, has exercised restraint to avoid appearing to diminish its support for Russia. However, the prospect of sanctions, which could sever their connection to the Western trade, is mounting pressure on China's banks. The optimistic perspective suggests that Russia and Ukraine are strategically positioning themselves to improve their bargaining power ahead of the peace negotiations, and that they will persist in demanding on enhanced military capabilities to counter each other as they continue to advance deeper into the Donbass and Ukraine-occupied Kursk. The pessimistic view holds that neither Russia nor Ukraine are prepared for peace, and they are attempting to persuade the international community of the legitimacy of their cause and their adversaries' unreasonable expectations. The rollout of the Ukraine plan before the General Assembly next week and its reaction will give the world a better view of how difficult it will be to get the two sides talking and willing to end a war that has generated an average of 1,100 casualties a day.